breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe. He's James. So let's get started with a question. How do you effectively lead and manage your former coworkers?
I think there are two big topics that I want to share. So the two things that I would say right off the bat is that you need to understand how to set and manage expectations, which is the advice that we give to all managers, new or experienced, as kind of the key management skill that you need to develop. The other piece, more specific to how do you actually lead those, so if you've just been promoted into a job, into a management role, and you are leading your former team, what I would say is along with managing expectations and saying that up front, you need to understand the difference between being friendly and being friends. Because in my view, you should be, as a manager, you should be friendly. You should be approachable. You should be cordial. You should treat everybody and create a welcoming environment. You are not there to be friends necessarily. And this can be really challenging if you've already had pre-existing friendships in the workplace. If it was your colleagues, your work friends, that might be a little bit easier to make that distinction. But if you have a close personal friend that you're working with, that's going to require some more effort and some more strategy around, because as the manager, you cannot be showing favoritism to your friends.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's good advice, but I think that last bit is there's more complexity to it than kind of just that, friend and friendly piece, because it is good advice, but I think that we also just need to acknowledge that it's a very complex thing, because sometimes
it is,
especially because if you've got, long-standing friendships, or you've got long relationships with people, or especially if you're in a type of job where the nature of the job is hectic or chaotic and you really form strong bonds, then it's a much harder line to walk. But I do think, though, that if people take your answer not as two different pieces of advice, but as one connected piece of advice, you need to manage expectations and know the difference between friends and friendly. I think that that's probably really the best approach for it, because you want to make sure that you are clear, and everything is kind of cards on the table, and people know what to expect of you, and they know what you expect of them, but to also make sure that the line between friend and friendly isn't something that you keep secret. It's something that you're overt with, and you make clear about when they can come to you as their longtime friend, or when they come to you as their boss, and sometimes allowing for a bit of flexibility in how that's handled, but knowing that that the dynamics have changed, so they have to adjust to those new dynamics.
What I like about this question is that it's a common situation that a lot of people find themselves in. We've actually been a part of every side of this discussion. Personally, I have gone from working with a close-knit team to stepping into the leadership, the management role of that existing team. A big part of when we're working with clients in developing performance frameworks and helping them to build their workplace culture, we are looking at internal succession planning as a key aspect of employee growth and development. So promoting people who have internally to take over teams. This is something that we deal with as a recommendation from that extent as well. But what's also really interesting is that you and I have been in this dynamic as well, because my current business partner was at one point my interim CEO. All right. So we personally have had that boss friend employee relationship play out in real time. Yeah. So it happens all the time. And what worries me is that what I tend to see often, if it's not, if people aren't given the proper preparation or advice, is that oftentimes I'll see people overcompensate.
Right.
They will, because the idea of, well, I need to be fair to everybody is so prominent, and they want to avoid favoritism, that they end up almost being harsher on their former coworkers and friends than they would be on anybody else, to avoid the perception of favoritism.
Right.
Or like, there's all kinds of weird challenges and dynamics that can happen. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and you're right about the fact that we've been on all sides. Like, yeah, like we do a lot of, helping organizations in our current work navigate this, with management training and supporting that internal succession planning. So, from outside working with a business perspective, I've had good friends of mine become my bosses in previous jobs. I've become the boss of friends in other jobs, and and some of the interim executive work that I used to do pre Roman 3. One of them was after you and I worked together for 7 or 8 years and became very close friends. I was asked to step into the company that you worked for, and as the interim CEO for a year. So yeah, it definitely, so we definitely, I think we have a very
Which was, I mean, it was great. You did a great job, but it was a weird dynamic for a little while, right?
Absolutely.
Like we had to adjust things. We had to have a frank conversation of, okay, how do we actually manage this boss relationship? Because I've said it before, I'm not the easiest employee. I'm really good at what I do, but I'm not always the easiest person to manage.
And I can account for that. But the thing is that I think that when any of these relationships happen, regardless of the organization or the authority levels or anything like that, just acknowledging the complexity of it, right? Yeah. It is really important getting that up front. But I do think your two answers at the very beginning about managing expectations and kind of defining the line between friends and friendly really is kind of probably where most of this should start. Because the example of when I stepped in and became your boss, it was, you and I had to kind of say, okay, this is the reality, but you and I care about each other on a personal level. So because of that, we both want what's best for each other, both professionally and personally. And so the way we have to do this is we have to play the long game. We have to recognize that some things we can talk about, some things we can't, some things we can talk about as your friends, some things we have to talk about as your boss. And it's about both sides just acknowledging this is going to be messy and uncomfortable. And what was even more challenging for me for that position was because the way I was brought in and the nature of the organization was very political. So I had a lot of eyes on me. And one of the concerns when I stepped in was the fact that I had you and I had this, you were a senior level employee, and you and I had a relationship. So there was concern that, about having me be the one that comes in and step in because of that. So it was actually a barrier. So there's a lot of pressure for us to do it right. But the fact that we acknowledged that this was going to be something that we had to figure out as we go, but as long as we were both on board with looking in the same direction, we both wanted the same things, then we just had to basically do our best to handle it. And a lot of it was about transparency and on both sides, but recognizing where the lines were and defining those. But that's why the skill of managing expectations is so vital.
It's huge.
Because you have to be able to kind of get out in front of everything so everyone knows what to expect of you. And the other thing too, I stepped into a lot of interim positions over the years, and what always gets me through is acknowledging that I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to make mistakes. Like, not the job interview part, but when I stepped in, one of the first conversations that I've had with people in any interim role with you and with other jobs was to say, I'm going to do my best. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm gonna, have some missteps, but this is what I'm trying to achieve, and what I hope we're all going to try and achieve together. And doing this with the different, boards that hired me, or whatever. being very clear upfront and transparent with expectations, so that way, you know, and not being afraid to be vulnerable, which was a big part of it too. Because one of the concerns I always see when it comes to a lot of people stepping into any leadership role, regardless if they're managing former coworkers or not, is the fake it till you make it problem,
Yes.
as I see it. Because I mean, as much as I, value kind of some of the philosophies around the fake it till you make it approach to leadership, I think it does more harm than good, because it sets you up in a position where you're afraid to be vulnerable, and you're like, and that you have to, again, portray a false confidence. And a
Mhm.
false confidence is something that can actually end up undercutting a lot of the way that you lead people and a lot of the way that you actually engage with others. Like the reverse favoritism, where you're harder on your friends, is to me a result of fake it till you make it, false confidence.
Yeah.
Because those are things where you're worrying about too much about yourself and your long-term and your short-term success, that you're not playing the long game and trying to figure out what's best for everybody, how everyone's going to be successful, and not allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And it's a tough thing to do, but in every situation that I've been in, that's been my saving grace when I stepped in to lead. Again, whether it's my former coworkers, whether it's my friends, or whether it's just people, total strangers.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I like the intent behind the statement, fake it till you make it, to me means that you don't have to wait until everything is absolutely perfect and aligned before you take on new responsibilities and new roles, right? Put yourself out there and try your best while you are developing the skills.
Yep.
Is kind of how I view that statement. But you're right, it gets kind of morphed into, I need to put on a persona that is not me.
Mm-hmm.
And the persona of a confident leader is somebody who is never wrong, who is decisive, who makes decisions, who can lead people, and if you don't have those skills, then you tend to default to things like micromanaging, because micromanagement really stems from a lack of confidence, insecurity in your own ability. If you are secure in your abilities and who you are, you should be able to trust your employees and help them develop the skills they need to be successful. If you are less confident, if you are faking it, trying to project a persona that's not you, then you're far more likely to fall into this key trap of micromanaging every little thing that happens. And this can be very common in the situation of leading former coworkers, because you did the job, right? If you're now managing people that you used to work alongside, then you used to do that job. So you may think that you can do the job better than them. You may have been promoted because of how confident and competent you were in doing the job.
Right.
But management now, in that new role of managing your former employees, your biggest task, your biggest responsibility is making sure that they have what they need to be successful in doing the job. You should not be in the weeds anymore.
Right. And I think that, especially it's tough when a coworker who you worked alongside with, as kind of someone that you enjoyed working with, got promoted, and often like, great, this person would be great at the job, but then if that confidence isn't there, if they are faking it till they make it sort of thing, or there's that idea of not fully acknowledging this changing dynamic, it can actually it can become awful, because again, you can have those overt problems like favoritism and reverse favoritism, but what's more is that power dynamic tends to change the amount of trust that exists.
Yeah.
Right. Because you no longer, this person, you no longer can trust this person, because of the way of the complexity of all this is playing out. And it can make for a very difficult workplace. And I mean, I've had the personal experience, where I had, coworkers that I really respected get promoted and become awful managers, and actually, and people left. I left the job, after a year of that, because it was just like, wow, this person really did not handle this transition well. And it's one of those things where it really is kind of, this is a very complex problem, but it's also not necessarily that hard to resolve. Because like I say, if people acknowledge upfront with managing expectations, and they really kind of make that line clear, and they're overt and they're transparent, and they try and maintain the trust that existed, and ideally build more,
Yeah.
that's going to be kind of the recipe for success. Because, you know, the other thing too is, and this is a bit of a potentially critical question, but I don't mean it in a critical way, is why, let's say the person listening, if you were promoted into a new job and you're managing your former coworkers, an important thing for you to be aware of is, why were you promoted? And what I mean by that is, the most common reasons people get promoted, this is like, you know, globally
Well documented study
yeah,
statistics.
exactly, is so the two most common reasons, and we talked about this before in another podcast, is because of, they either have tenure, they've been in the job for a long time, and it was a sense of like a seniority thing, or it was because, you know, they showed great task proficiency in their current job. So the thinking was, well, if they're that good at this job, they must be great at helping other people do that job.
It's a reward for good performance.
Right. And those two reasons are pretty bad reasons to promote someone, because the main reason to promote somebody effectively for organizational success is if that person showed natural aptitude to lead.
Yeah.
You know,
or you've invested in that person to develop the skills, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And then we're not saying that if you're promoted because of seniority, or because as a reward for being very good at your job, that you're going to be a bad leader. We're not saying that by any means. What we're saying is, then you now need to develop the skills that you need to lead effectively. Management training, you know, the ability to kind of manage expectations, all this kind of stuff are things you're going to have to develop as new skills, because without those, this is when you may fall into some of these traps that we talked about.
I think the two most important things, building on that, so there's the first part of what I said at the beginning of being able to set and manage expectations, the friendly thing, all of that combined, I think is a really important first piece of advice. The other piece of advice, building on what you were talking about, and, you know, it's now your responsibility to develop the skills if you don't currently have them, or if they're not a natural aptitude for you, is that we are big on frameworks, and developing a framework for how you make decisions can be a huge boost to your confidence, and can be a tremendous asset in how you develop your skills, in how you lead and manage people. And what I mean by that is, so for us, we build these tools frequently, and we have one that we really like, that we subscribe to, that we call integrity leadership. That is it's a decision-making framework for how do you evaluate decisions, how do you make sure that you are leading with integrity. And there's lots of different leadership and management programs out there. You need to find one that is going to work for you. Whether that, like, there's the concepts of servant leadership, there's different leadership models, there's different management models. I would personally beg and plead with you not to subscribe to an authoritarian style. But there are different models out there that you can use. The key is to be consistent in your application of your decisions. And having a framework that you run these problems through to help you decide how you're going to respond will be huge in consistency. Because if you are consistent, then at least you are providing people with, they know what to expect, right? I've had lots of managers that I've worked with over the years. Even personally, I would rather have a consistently bad manager than an inconsistent manager. Ideally, you want a consistently good manager. That would be fantastic. But inconsistency, never knowing how somebody is going to respond, whether you end up having to walk on eggshells all the time. And as a employee dealing with that situation, it causes a ton of stress.
Yeah.
Consistency is huge. having some methodology for providing that consistency is probably the best advice that I can give you, paired with know how to set and manage expectations.
Yeah. No, I think that's terrific advice, because the thing too is, like, when you don't have, again, those clear expectations, and you have someone that potentially is unconfident in their spot, and they're inconsistent, you end up creating these really uneasy, walking on eggshells, never know what to expect, anxiety creating work environments.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a huge change in the climate of the workplace when you walk in, when you have these new power dynamics. And especially if these problematic things, like, like the lack of confidence and poor managing, poor expectation management, it happens. It can create a lot of, like, passive aggressive actions amongst people, because there is that sense of, like, almost like you're not really too sure what's going on. So there's this sense of, like, almost like reacting to this uneasy, anxiety inducing climate with a very passive aggressive attitude, which tends to kind of compound stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have a webinar, we talk about confident leadership. That's one of our favorite ones we give. But, like, in that webinar, we talk a lot about we call the 3 deaths of the modern leader. And a lot of these really do come from that lack of confidence. And so I'll just kind of give a quick summary of those, just because they're very important for people to be aware of. So the first one is the first death. First of the 3 deaths is self-sabotage. So self-sabotage is the idea of your sacrificing your long-term success for your short-term comfort. So it's really about prioritizing your comfort zones. You do what you know, so because that's what's comfortable to you, and you're really not willing to move beyond that. So we've seen this with kind of some clients that are concerned about the effectiveness of some of their managers, because the managers kind of keep doing the same things over and over again instead of trying to expand their skills. A lot of times it's because the managers aren't properly trained, and actually to do the new stuff is almost like they're supposed to just absorb this stuff kind of passively, or download it from the cloud. I really don't know how they're supposed to have this new knowledge if they're not trained. But there is that sense of the person's not willing to take the risk, so everything is defaulting to their comfort zone. So and that can be
especially true if there's no psychological safety in the workplace and people are scared to make mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it really is something that is a very common thing, especially when people are often, when they're promoted through we do see this kind of a little bit more often when people are promoted through seniority, is they stick to what they know, and they stick to what worked before, whether it still works now, sort of thing. So that really is a common problem that kind of arises from that. So the second death of the modern leader is self-preservation. And this is something where people are preoccupied with approval or making popular decisions. They're about making sure that they are going to have this job again tomorrow. So it's very much about their main focus is on themselves and maintaining the appearance of competency through making sure that everything that they do is either popular or will have the glowing recommendation from everyone. So very safe
people pleasing, right? Like it's just trying to, if you are always constantly trying to make everybody happy because you can't stand anybody being mad at you, I'm sorry, but you probably are not right for a leadership position, because a manager, a leader, you're going to make decisions that are unpopular. If you're not making decisions that are unpopular with somebody, then at some point in your career, then you're probably falling into this trap. Because the nature of leadership and management, you cannot please everybody all the time. You have to be comfortable with the fact that at certain points, some people are going to like you more or less than others.
Yeah. And the thing too is that, this is something that is very evident when people feel out of their depth, or they feel unprepared for the position, that it's more like, I don't want to make the hard decision, so I'll just do what is popular.
Yeah.
And that's a very dangerous approach to take. when that's the only tool in your toolbox, then that can take you down a very dangerous road.
Yeah.
So the third death, so the third of the three deaths is micromanagement. And this is one that probably doesn't require a lot of explanation, but this is people that get really into the weeds and they're more confident in doing the work rather than empowering others to do the work. So it's about, making sure that they have the control that they need and that everything is being checked and rechecked, because they're wanting to make sure that they are doing what they're comfortable with, and what they're comfortable with is often tends to be the work itself, not leading and managing others to do the work.
This is my personal biggest pet peeve. I like micromanagement is, I just see it as an absolute death of a team. I've experienced it way more than I would care to admit. It is, I really believe that micromanagement does not come from a place of just wanting to control everything necessarily. I believe that it comes from a place of not being confident in their abilities. I've seen wonderful people become terrible managers because they are not confident in their ability to lead others, to empower others, to trust others to do the job, because they have the proficiency of doing it. They know what that job should be. So they get into the weeds because that's where their confidence stems from. And they haven't built the confidence in themselves to be able to manage and lead others.
Right. And I think that in these three deaths, so self-sabotage, self-preservation, and micromanagement, tend to be three of the biggest mistakes that come up when someone is leading former coworkers.
Yeah.
Because with self-sabotage, it's a comfort zone. Sometimes the dynamics don't change and they default to kind of being the friend boss with some, and then you get into the favoritism problems. Sometimes it's a matter of self-preservation and people are trying to shed the bad reputation that they're going to be the friend boss, so they overcompensate with reverse favoritism, and they're really trying to either appease those above them by overcompensating, or they're trying to just kind of say majority rules, whatever you guys want to do, as long as you vote for it, I'm happy to do that as your boss. And micromanagement tends to be, well, I wasn't actually prepared to do the job, so I'm just going to do the work, or I'm more comfortable doing the work, so I'm just going to kind of lord over everybody to make sure that the work is done because I'm more comfortable with that than I am in my new role. And these are problems that tend to come from, like you say, it's a lack of confidence, because where lack of confidence tends to exist is when we're in unfamiliar situations. So when we're working, the tasks, the duties of our job as a manager, there's things that are familiar to us. As a new manager, there's things that are familiar to us from our current job. So if we were, if we were the cashier at the grocery store and now we're the cashier manager, well, we know a lot of the stuff that the cashier did, so we're familiar with that. So we're confident in our ability to handle the stuff that we can rely on our experience with.
Right.
But when it comes to the unfamiliar, that's when we get concerned because we don't know how to handle it. So we go back to either self-sabotage, playing our comfort zones, focusing on being what's popular with self-preservation, or just micromanaging the work because we don't know how to handle the unfamiliar. Yeah. And this is why James talked about you need a framework, because what a framework does, a system, can help guide you handle the unfamiliar. Because if you can have a playbook or approach or a framework that can allow you to navigate the unfamiliar, then that's going to be where your confidence comes from, and that's going to be the management skills that you're going to need to handle this complex dynamic of managing your former coworkers.
And until you build the confidence in yourself to handle these things, the framework can be where you place your confidence. Right? I don't believe that people make a conscious effort or conscious decision to micromanage. I don't believe they make a conscious decision to self-sabotage. I think it's where we default to when we are not confident, when we are scared, when we are not sure how to react, we go to our default setting, right? And I do believe that even though these are really big problems, I don't think people choose to be micromanagers. I think we default to it because we don't have the skills, the confidence, or the framework that we can place our confidence in.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is really, if we can help people do that, develop that piece, it will change how they engage with their teams and how they manage their teams.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's almost like these three deaths, self-sabotage, self-preservation, and micromanagement, are more like instinctual primal defaults that, like, I don't know what to do in this, so I'm going to do I'll do one of these three things, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's almost like a reaction to not being able to handle the unfamiliar. So we kind of mentioned early on briefly that we have a system that we use, we call integrity leadership. I think it wouldn't hurt to I think I'll kind of go through that a little bit, just to kind of share that idea, because integrity leadership is designed to be a framework, designed to be a bit of a system to kind of help you navigate the unfamiliar, and kind of the rules that you can kind of put some confidence in to handle it. So I'm just going to give a quick summary, but if anyone's interested in looking at this in more detail, we have content on our learning portal, Roman 3 Academy. Under our knowledge suite, we have a section on this, and there's some videos on our YouTube channel that get into this a little bit more. This is something
there's a full replay of one of our webinars where we talk about this concept. Maybe we can put that link in the show notes or something.
That's a good idea. Okay, so what integrity leadership is, again, I'm just going to give it briefly. It's really kind of 5 main areas. So the first area is what we call reliable respect. And this is about providing a fair, consistent, and dependable level of respect to all people, regardless of your position or status. What reliable respect does is it allows others to always know that your thoughts, efforts, and actions are coming from a place of authenticity and empathy. Mm-hmm. So how you use this as a framework is to know that no matter who comes to you, how they come to you, the energy they're bringing to it, your conscious choice is to always be reliably respectful. And even if they're not being respectful to you, you can show respect back. So that way it plays a very consistent level of engagement with people, that they know no matter what you say is going to come from authenticity and empathy, and that they can develop some comfort and some trust in you around that level of respect. Now, the second one is probably one of the most important, which is moral courage.
Yeah.
And this is about being brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's not popular. So it's often appealing to sacrifice doing what's right in favor of doing what's easy. But this is why it's important to have the courage to be unpopular, to make hard decisions, and to face challenges head on. So this idea is something that is kind of one of the hardest things to do as a leader, but it's also one of the most important things to do as a leader. And this is a direct, almost like shield against the self-preservation points, because again, if a leader always defaults to the most popular or the easiest answer, that tells a story of that leader to other people that they don't want, that they're a pushover, they're a people pleaser, they're more focused on themselves and on doing the right thing. And it's one of those things where the moral courage piece is the hardest thing to do, but it also tends to be the most impactful thing to do.
And I just want to add, in the short term, you'll probably tick some people off because you are doing things that you believe are right, not the most popular choice. But again, consistency. If you are consistently applying moral courage and doing what is right and not just what is easy, people will recognize that. And even though at the beginning, when you start doing that, you're probably going to encounter more resistance. If you are consistent in the application of it, then people will begin to trust and build the confidence that you are actually making the best decision, because that's what you have proven time and time again.
Right. And a big part of it too is also moral courage coupled with the managing expectations. If you're getting out there why you're making this decision, and you're identifying why it's the right thing despite the fact that it's not popular, and you make that case as part of it. You're not just making the decision, you're actually putting the expectations, but clearing the expectations behind it and getting in front of it. that tends to make it a bit easier for people to accept. And as James said, the consistency of it allows for people to know that that's what you're going to do all the time. So they can, again, become to rely on that. So the next one is honest acknowledgement. And this is about having the confidence to acknowledge the efforts and contributions, as well as the perspectives and opinions of other people. So being honest and properly recognizing others when they've assisted you and sharing the credit is something that really is required in order to lead with integrity. So a lot of honest acknowledgement is about the fact that, you're not taking credit for other people's work. You're acknowledging other thoughts and opinions, even if they're counter to yours and you disagree with them. You're acknowledging them if there is, further merit and further perspective, and you're again, not dismissive of other people's ideas, but saying this is kind of the full story picture. But a big part of this too is making sure that you're sharing and acknowledging the work and credit and perspectives of other people, because part of that too is good leaders build people up, and there's an old expression like, good leaders hog the blame and share the credit.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and then the next one is trustworthy influence. This is about treating the responsibility and authority that you've been provided in your leadership or management role in a way that allows other people to trust you and for you to trust others. It's about creating a sense of duty to the obligations that come with the position and the power that you've been provided. So others need to know that the influence that you've been provided will be respected and will not lead them astray. So a big part of this is kind of how you wield power, right? Yeah. It's when you're in a management role, a leadership role, you've been given authority, you've been given power over people, you've been given influence. And it's about the people know that you're going to have some reverence for that sense of that sense of authority.
Yeah. Do you respect the trust that people have put in you? And because you now have authority over others, right? As a manager, as a leader, you are in a position of authority. How you treat that authority, whether you wield it like a hammer or whether you use it to build other people up.
Yeah.
How you wield authority says a lot about who you are as a human being.
Yeah. And again, I think the trustworthy influence tends to be probably one of the most fundamental elements required to effectively lead and manage your former coworkers.
Absolutely. I agree.
Right? Yeah. So because again, the idea that you want to make sure that the coworkers that you have know that you're going to have reverence for this new responsibility, and you're not going to use it to crush them or enrich them, that you're going to actually show, again, that reverence for this new responsibility that you've been provided. And so the last one is empowering others. And this is about valuing those who you are responsible for and providing them what they need to be successful. Because a big part of leadership is about taking care of those that you are that work under you, that are in your charge, that you are responsible for. And if your goal as a leader is to build up and make those or make other people successful, that is the sense of the kind of integrity that you need to be able to have if you really want to be able to kind of be effective and actually create that sustainable long-term peace. Because employees and those that you lead need to be your priority. Because often when you're in a management role, you have tasks of the job they have to do, and you have the people management side of it. And we tend to often push the people management side apart aside, and we're more focused on the managerial task piece. But really, we should be really spending most of our time on the people management side, because that's going to be how we reduce kind of the managerial workload in a lot of cases. But we can be far more effective by having many people empowered to provide their best than, dragging people along through the managerial practices while ignoring the people management side of it.
Yeah. In my view, the best indicator of your success as a manager is how successful your team is.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's one of those things where, their success is the indication of your success. And that's a really important way to maybe consider what your new approach might be while you step into this new role to effectively lead your former coworkers. is maybe that's one of the expectations that could be a powerful place to start when you're having these early conversations where things are going to be different now. But if you go in to say, my job is to take care of you, so your job is to take care of the customers or whatever like that. But if you say, I'm successful when you're successful, that can be one of those early defining moments in your new leadership or management role that can allow for you to be able to have that effective start to leading your former coworkers.
Saying it and then backing it up consistently, right? I'm going to keep hammering that home because consistency is the key to your long-term success. Having a framework that you use consistently so that you can place your confidence in that and then build your confidence in yourself so that you don't have to, so that you internalize these things and it becomes a part of how you approach leading others.
Right. All right. I think that's kind of about it. I think I'll do a bit of a wrap up.
Yeah, I love this topic, and I really hope that something in this, if you are listening to this and you are a new manager or you are new into leading somebody else, let us know whether anything that we've talked about makes a difference for you or is valuable, because we want to make sure that this is such an important topic. And it's important to understand how can you build that confidence and lead people effectively.
Yeah, and leadership and management is something that we talk about a bit, but something that we have a lot more that we could talk about. So it's something that is of interest to someone listening. We'd be happy to let us know, and maybe we could do more on this topic.
Yeah.
So the question was, how do you effectively lead and manage your former coworkers? Well, the two initial things to consider at the very beginning are to manage expectations with people up front and to know the difference between being friends and being friendly. A lot of the ways that this new power dynamic can happen when you're leading, whether it's former coworkers or even former friends, is to understand that the power dynamic has to change, but you have to change in a way that will allow for the trust that has been established to maintain. So when you're leading former friends, you want to make sure that you're both clear, that you both want what's best for each other long term, and that the choices that you're going to make and the dynamic that you have to create has to allow for that. You want to make sure that you're, putting in an environment where you treat everybody with respect and transparency and consistency, because you want to make sure that this is a place where you're going to be able to build confidence in yourself to lead, and then others are going to become confident in your ability to lead. Because what you want to do is you want to avoid the 3 deaths of the modern leader, which is self-sabotage, where you stick to your comfort zones, self-preservation, where you're preoccupied with approval and making popular decisions, and micromanagement, where you're more comfortable doing the work than you are actually leading others to do the work. Because what happens is when we're in a leadership role, or we tend to be able to have confidence in familiar situations because we can rely on our experiences. But what happens when we're in unfamiliar situations is we tend to develop a lack of confidence and default to those 3 deaths that I mentioned, because we're not prepared to handle the unfamiliar. So in order to become confident, prepared for the unfamiliar, we need a framework or a system to guide us through the decisions that we're going to make and how to act when we're in these unfamiliar situations. A possible opportunity for people to build a bit of a framework is going to be around what we call integrity leadership, which is reliable respect and providing fair and consistent, dependable levels of respect to everybody. Moral courage, being brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's not popular. Honest acknowledgement, having the confidence and acknowledgement of the efforts and contributions of others. Trustworthy influence, treating the responsibility and authority that you have been provided in a way that allows others to trust you and for you to trust others. And empowering others, valuing those who you are responsible for, and providing them what they need to be successful. All right. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.